Welcome, Rebecca.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. Um, Especially since we had technical difficulties earlier. So I'm speaking to you now from our local library where they have all sorts of um, internet help and assistance as well as wonderful books. Um, but I'd like to talk today about climate change and dealing with the disasters that come from that and the advice that I've gotten from the common wild plants, which you might also call weeds. And they are some of my best friends and advisors in life. And so when I have a problem or a concern, I usually turn to them. And right now, I have a concern because I live on an island. We can see the erosion getting worse. We can see the storms getting worse. We have lots of hurricanes predicted in our future. In other places, it might be droughts or wildfires or flooding or tornadoes, but we're all seeing more extreme weather. And islanders are used to lots of weather. We're tough, but we are being faced with a level of change that we've never seen. And that is a little scary. And I have to say that when I get scared, um, I like to say a little mantra to calm myself down. And my favorite one I will share with you is when in danger or in doubt, run and panic, scream and shout. For some reason, that always calms me down. And once you do that, once you've calmed yourself down, then it's time to ask what is practical? What can actually be done? And this is something that weeds are good at reminding me because they're very practical and they're always about what can you do right here, right now. Maybe it's just a crack in the sidewalk, but if there's enough to grow, that's where you grow. So, thinking about possible disasters and how to deal with them and how to adapt to the changes is what I have been thinking about. And I would say that there were three areas where the weeds have really given me support. One is in the area of first aid. There's a few herbs like plantain and yarrow that can keep an injury from becoming infected. And that is not going to solve all possible medical issues, but when we had a relatively small hurricane, Hurricane Bob, there were so many trees down across the road that we were not able to get out for over a week. So if someone had needed medical care, that's long enough for an infection to become difficult to treat. And those herbs, usually applied externally, can keep infection from happening. So that's one thing, first aid. Then there's food. After any sort of disaster like a hurricane, once you've cleaned up and assessed the damage, you have to take care of the survivors. And looking around and seeing lots of food right where you are is very comforting. Um, it's also very nice to be able to connect with the land where you are and become closer to it. And that is really helped by eating the wild common plants. Um, I personally don't go after the rare natives, like fiddleheads where I am are rather rare. So I like to eat the common weeds, most of which came from Europe along with my ancestors and are not native. And that is one reason why they've taken over in disturbed areas. So that is all the more reason to eat them and to use them. And so feeding people is something that weeds are very, very good at. And you do not have to wait for a disaster to start enjoying them either. But then the main gift that I feel that the plants have offered to me is not so specific and practical as first aid and food. It's more of an attitude shift. And that is when I observe the plants, I see that none of them stands alone. They all are members of communities, and they depend not only on the others of their species, but also on their pollinators, their predators, the soil organisms, the mycelial web. All of these things are important in their life. And the ability to form multi-textural, diverse, connected communities is something that um, observation of nature, for me, it's been mostly about the weeds, but really any aspect of nature will show you that everything is very, very interconnected. And we have this idea, some of us have this idea that we are separate consciousnesses moving through a basically inert background of a world. Um, that has never been the case. It's been completely disproved by science, but we still often act as if that was the case. And um, if you look a little more closely, you see that we can't even take a breath of air without exchanging with the plants. We can't do anything. We can't live without all of the other organisms that interact with us. We have the carbon dioxide oxygen exchange from breathing, we have the nutrient exchange, um, and all the different ways that we are interwoven with our surroundings. And so that is something that um, if we are going to adapt as a species and also as a culture and even as an individual, we need to accept and enjoy that connectedness instead of assuming that we are separate from everything else. And that is a late European idea. It's not necessary to being human, but we even think of our species as being exceptional and not really um, bound by the same natural laws as the rest of the world. And that too is proving to be um, just not sustainable because it's not realistic. Um, After Hurricane Katrina, they did um, a study of different neighborhoods and which ones had the highest death rates and the highest rates of survival. And they found out that the best indicator of survival was not education, income, ethnicity, the best indicator of survival was whether or not people knew their neighbors' names. So that connectedness, even amongst the people, was very, very important when it came to a time of difficulty. You can't wait until a disaster to find out who your neighbors are. You should be thinking already about who is within walking distance of you, who might need help. Are there any children that might get stranded without an adult? Are there elders who live alone? Are there people with mobility issues? Is there somebody that you could ask if you need help? Do you know a nurse or someone who can fix a generator or someone who has a freezer full of food that if the electricity goes out, they might need to share that? You can't make these relationships when you need them, you have to make them beforehand. And I really encourage you to try to find and enhance those connections in your immediate surroundings wherever you can. And it doesn't mean you have to like everybody or agree with everybody, but the more dense and diverse the connections, the more resilient the system. And I would like to suggest that when you consider your neighbors, you not only consider the people, but also the plants and what you can do for them and what they can do for you, because they are a very important part of our community and they can help us a lot. They can also help us a lot with the idea of how to adapt. Now, I'm a little older and I know a lot of people who just seem to be stuck and they would like to change. They know that we have to change, but they keep doing things the same way. And maybe it's always driving your car, and you know that we can't all drive our cars everywhere and have the world be a good place. But it's hard to stop because that's our habit and that's what's expected. So, how do you how do you break out of those habits? How do you change permanently in a healthy direction without losing yourself and your principles? Well, the plants are a big help in advising about that. Plants existed long before we animals evolved. By the time we animals evolved, the air was already oxygenated by the plants. So our systems are pretty much predicated on the conditions that they provided for us. And they have been through a lot of years, a lot of millennia longer than us, and a lot of different changes like ice ages and extinction events. And they continue to adapt beautifully to the changing world and the changing climate. So we have a lot to learn. We animals are considered by some people to be the younger siblings in the natural world. And we can learn a lot from watching how our older siblings, the plants, and their um, forerunners, the fungi, and their forerunners, the bacteria, they can all teach us a lot about adapting and evolving. But the plants are the friendliest and the most easy to understand because they're the closest to us. So when I think about how the common weedy plants adapt. If you look at a system, any system, anything to do with plants, height, number of fruits produced, bloom time, really anything. So, say bloom time and going to seed. If you map that out for a species, you would find it goes in a curve like a wave, a bell curve. And on one end are the plants that bloomed way too early and got frosted. And on the other end are the plants that bloomed way too late and there was snow on the flowers. And in the middle is a big lump of all the plants that bloomed at the normal time, at the time that usually works the best. And they are the ones that usually succeed and set seeds because they bloomed at the right time. Pretty much everything in nature follows one of those bell curve patterns. A few on one extreme, most of them in the middle where it's usually successful, and a few on the other extreme. So when conditions change, like maybe there's a hurricane or a drought or a flood or a late frost or any number of other things that makes that middle crop not succeed, it's one of the outliers that saves the species by continuing the seeds. And it might be the ones that were early, it might be the ones that were late, maybe even both of them. But when the ones in the middle don't work, it's the ones on the edges that that fill in. And if that change becomes relatively permanent over time, that middle where most of the plants express themselves, that will gradually move in that direction. So that is basically how they adapt. They no matter how long the normal average middle section is the one to succeed, the plant never says, okay, we don't need those outliers anymore because they never set seed, so we're only going to go with the successful ones. They never say that. They always have those little wings on the outside of the bell curve, stretching out. And the farther out it stretches, the more extreme the diversity of the expression of that plant trait, the more resilient that plant is. So when it comes to humans and our need to adapt, I think that it is the outliers and the edges and the people who are not technically normal, normal just meaning in the largest category with everybody else doing what is usually considered to be the most successful thing. It's in times of when the times are not normal, then it doesn't always work to be in that normal category. And then it is those people on the edges who are able to be positioned in a place to succeed. And that will carry all of us forward. And that will help create directions for change that will be positive for us. So, whatever trait you might be looking at, whatever form of expression, you'll find that it maps out in one of those bell curves. And if you want to adapt, don't look to what is the common path to success. Look to those outliers and those alternative um, forms of expression. So those things are very comforting to me, and I feel that we have a lot of people now in our culture who are becoming more proud of being outliers, of being not in the middle of the mainstream in whatever way that might be. Um, and I think that those kinds of people are really our hope for the future, because we know that we're not going to have any more normalness, um, normal weather, normal seasons. Um, I don't think we'll really see anything normal for a long time. So that means that um, our alternative viewpoints and behaviors are where our new directions are going to come from. And the enthusiasm with which the common weedy plants engage in this process is also really encouraging to me, because it's very easy as a human to get depressed, guilty. Why are we destroying the planet and everything on it? And it's definitely important to feel and work through those feelings. But for me, they have not led to very much positive action. Whereas the kind of enthusiasm that you find in a weed blooming when it's growing in a crack in the parking lot or in some other inhospitable area, um, that just tells me that it doesn't always have to be um, depressing and discouraging. And one of the biggest messages that these weeds have given to me is bloom anyway. Don't require that conditions be perfect. Weeds don't need to have a perfectly prepared garden bed and all kinds of attention. They find a place where they can survive, and they survive with a great deal of enthusiasm, and they spread their seeds everywhere. And if there's one little spot where they can grow, they will grow. And in many cases, like for example, lamb's quarters, one of my favorite um, delicacies this time of year, um, they have very small, shiny, dark seeds, and about half of those seeds will grow the following year. The year after that, about half again will grow. And then the rest will just grow a few each year for over 40 years. So if you were to pull out every lamb's quarters plant in your garden for 40 years and never let them go to seed, they would still be there. And if you went away, up they would come. And that is just very encouraging to me. And that is the sort of behavior that we humans are going to need if we are going to adapt and be around for millennia and become wise elders of the natural world, and not just um, children that have eyes rolled at us. Um, So I would say that for me, the encouragement of weeds has been partly philosophical. It's also been very much so on a physical level as I eat the weeds and use them for medicine. It um, helps my body adapt to the changes of the seasons and of the weather and of aging and of um, chronic illness and all the various things that need to be dealt with in life. Um, the diversity of the microbiome that is possible when you eat a lot of different kinds of foods, especially wild foods and raw foods and fermented foods. That really extends that bell curve within your own body and within your own health capabilities so that you can adapt to more different conditions, just like a weed does. And so, eating, picking, even just sitting and breathing with plants diversifies our natural internal ecosystem, which is so important to our individual adaptability. So I would say that the optimism of plants, the diversity and the love of diversity that the plants show, and most of all, the interwoven, interconnected communities that they model for us have really um, enlightened my personal journey and given me a lot of hope and energy for positive action that I did not have before I started really paying attention to what the weeds were doing. So I really encourage you to invite some weeds into your life. And if you know plants already, you probably have lots of friends among the weeds. But if you are just starting out, um, start with one. Start with one that's really common where you live and learn to know that one and just start noticing it here and there and where it grows, where it likes to grow. And pretty soon you'll be ready to add another one. And after a while, you'll know quite a few. But even if you only know one or two, it will connect you to a side of life that is successfully adapting to climate change and to the progression of history on this planet in very creative and effective ways. And we have a lot to learn from them. And I'm just very, very grateful to call those weeds my friends. And I'm very appreciative of this chance to talk to you. I'm sorry because of the technological difficulties that I can't answer questions. But if you want to get in touch with me, Native Earth Teaching Farm is our farm. We're on Facebook, we have a website, and you can also contact me through the publisher, Llewellyn. Thank you so much.